ladies and gentlemen. The idea is that as we are looking at decarbonizing transport, in next 10-12 minutes, I will kind of try to make a case for a pathway that will deliver on this decarbonizing of transport. Now, if we look at a 2020 versus a 2050 scenario, we'll realize that developed countries, because of the access to finance, the access to technology, are able to reduce their emission in a space of 30 years. But whatever reduction that they will get, it will not only be offset, but it will in fact go many folds if developing economies like India are not able to reduce their emission. So if you look at this slide, you will realize that China, India, Brazil, and some of the other developing economies, in a business as usual scenario, forget about reduction, there will be huge amount of increase in emission. So whatever benefit that we'll get from some countries, it will not be enough for us to kind of address this whole issue of either getting to a Paris Agreement commitment or even the national commitment which some of these countries have done for the net zero targets. The other important thing which I was trying to make was that even if we forget climate change, I think there's a very pressing issue of public health. And this is what the number I was trying to quote from our study, which only looked at transport vehicle exhaust alone. And we found that India, roughly about 74,000, 75,000 lives are lost every year, premature deaths due to kind of emission that comes from the transport sector. And I think the other thing we have to understand that real world emission from transport is very different from emission that happens when the vehicles go in for prototypes testing and vehicles when they go in from PUC testing. And next week we will come to, so we'll release our preliminary findings from the first of its kind result study that is done in India on understanding the real world emission. When I say real world emission, I mean when the vehicles are moving, what comes out from the tailpipe is something which we don't know. So hopefully next week we are able to provide some insight, and once that comes into light, you will be surprised to know what comes out from the tailpipe of your vehicle, if it is not a zero emission vehicle, is very different from what you get when you go in for a PUC certification versus what you get when that mate of the vehicle had gone in for prototype testing. And again, the numbers are very, very scary. And this is what Mr. Amitabh Kant also said, that if you are going to import 88, 89%, 90% fuel from outside, how can we be energy secured? So as we move towards self-reliant or Nirvarta, the question is, what is it that we can deliver? Now, we did this analysis to understand what technology benefits can give us a climate-friendly targets. And we realized that electrification of road transport is the best bet for climate solution. So we did some kind of modeling to understand what if we model whatever policies are announced, what if we model some of the policies that we think are going to be announced, and what if we also model some of the policies that we hope would come in the coming years. And we realized that with a very aggressive policy push towards electrification of transport, we can meet potentially a scenario of a sub 2 degree climate future. Electrification of transport alone will not give us to a 1.5 degree, which Mr. Kant was quoting. That will require something to be done much more. We would need some more avoid shift policies to reach to a 1.5 degree future. But a sub 2 degree future is absolutely possible with the aggressive push towards electrification. Now, why only electric? Why not other fuels? What about gas? What about biofuels? What about hydrogen ice? What about hybrids? So we try to answer this question that as a researcher, it's very important to keep our options open. Let's develop all technologies. And whatever technologies that can deliver, that will deliver. But let's not keep our options closed. It's a good conversation, but it's a very theoretical conversation. Because if you want to keep option open, you have to invest all the possible resources for developing gas infrastructure, for developing hydrogen infrastructure, for developing electric infrastructure, for developing fossil fuel infrastructure. We don't have that much money and we don't have that much time. So we have to make our bets that amongst the array of technologies, what is it that can deliver in the shortest amount of time? And we try to answer this question in a technical way, looking at what technologies, what powertrain technologies in road transport can deliver on these targets. And we looked at gasoline, biofuels, diesel, CNG, plug-in hybrid, and this is incidentally for life cycle emission for cars in India, global, as well as we have one in India as well. And we found three important takeaways. One, you cannot decarbonize transport with internal combustion engine. You take petrol, you take diesel, you take CNG, you take whatever fuel, ICE will not deliver on climate goals. End of the story. Second is, while CNG is good from public health perspective, CNG is not a very good fuel for the climate perspective. In fact, if we account for the methane leakage that happens both upstream and downstream, a CNG car is in fact dirtier than a diesel car from a climate change perspective. And third is, only two technologies that can deliver on climate: battery electric and hydrogen fuel cell. So that's the three important takeaways from this study which we presented in COP26. The other question that comes to mind is that this is only one part of the story. The other part of the story is that if we start cleaning the grid, these benefits will only improve, which is the 2021 number and the 2030 number. So as the green grid gets cleaner, this number will only become stronger. And therefore, we now know a pathway. And the pathway is produce green electrons, which is renewable energy. You will have two options: store the green electrons in a battery and power battery electric, or use those green electrons to create green molecules, which is hydrogen, green hydrogen, and use that in a fuel cell to power hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. So that's the pathway that we are getting at. The other important thing is, and which Subramanian also mentioned earlier, what about India, which gets predominant energy from coal? Should we wait for grid to clean and then push electric, or can the electric start now? So we tried to answer this question, and we found that even with India's grid, which is predominantly powered by fossil fuel, electric vehicles are cleaner on a life cycle emission basis. And if you look at a car in India, it's cleaner by almost 20%. And if you look at two-wheeler in India, it's cleaner by 40 to 50%. So with the present grid, which is predominantly fossil fuel based, electric vehicles emit less in terms of life cycle emission. But as we start cleaning grid, the story is going to grow multifolds. So this is what I said, a 2021 number. And if you look at a 2030 number, it's only. So again, the pathway is very clear, which was not the case earlier. And the last two slides. So what will it take for zero emission vehicles to align with the 2070 commitment? And our research, and this will come out very shortly, shows that if we have to reach a 2070 net zero target, then not later than 2045, all our vehicles have to become net zero emission. Which means all the three-wheelers, two-wheelers, three-wheelers have to be 100% zero emission by not later than 2035, the cars not later by 2040, and buses by 2040 and trucks by upon 2050. So roughly by 2045, maybe next 20 odd years, the entire fleet has to become zero emission. And that's the pathway to achieve the net zero 2070. So the big question is, what is it that we can do? So we have 5 policies to deliver this commitment or this pathway. We have done very well on the middle part, which is the financial incentive. So FAME scheme, state EV policies are very good to give financial incentives, which is good. We are also doing a lot of work on charging infrastructure, which is also great. And we are doing some work around consumer awareness. But I think we need more. And 2 important policy instruments that we have not done, but we have to do, because Otherwise, we won't be able to reach that commitment in that time duration. Is one, we have to come out with some kind of phase-out targets for ICE. Europe has said not after 2035. Many other geographies are coming up with a phase-out target. So we also have to come up with some phase-out targets of internal combustion engine. And second, we also have to ensure some binding regulation. Regulation in terms of fuel economy standards, regulation in terms of emission standards, or regulation in terms of some kind of supply side mandate. If we are able to bring all these five policy instruments together, I think we can achieve this transition at a much more faster pace, because we don't have the time and we don't have the money to convert all our vehicles to electric in the given time.